Saskatchewan's Premier is no stranger to trade missions, but this time he's hoping for a high-profile wingman to join him. Moe is calling on Prime Minister Mark Carney to head to China with him to lobby the Chinese government over canola tariffs. The latest is China's more than 75% tariff on canola seed. The NDP says it's been asking Moe to go to China for their takes on this and other issues making headlines. We're joined by our political panel. Murray Mandryk is a political columnist, and we're also joined by Jeremy Symes, who covers the legislature for the Canadian Press. Good morning, Murray.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning.
So, Jeremy, what is the latest on the canola tariffs, and what's the reaction been from both the province and from Ottawa?
Right. As you mentioned, it's a nearly 76% tariff on canola seed. And China has accused Canada's exporters of dumping the product in China. And so basically what they're saying is they're flooding the Chinese market with cheap canola, and that's hurting local producers in China. Now, the federal government and producers here deny that is happening. They say they are following rules-based trade. But this move already, even though it happened about a week and a bit ago, has already caused the price of canola to fall. We're talking about wiping out millions of dollars in its value. And so producers are expecting to take a hit to their pocketbook. They're also feeling really uncertain right now. Canola is a very important crop for Saskatchewan, and China's a really big market. It's our second biggest market. And so if China starts buying less canola, we have a bunch of canola coming off harvest. What do we do with it all if China doesn't buy it? There aren't a lot of other countries that will take our canola. So that's a big concern. China's move, this duty was seen in response to Canada's 100% tariff on electric vehicles. And it's just another Chinese tariff as well that we're getting hit with in Canada. We already have a 100% tariff on canola, oil, and meal, and we have some tariffs on peas. So there is a lot going on. Premier Scott Moe and Cody Bloy, he is Prime Minister Mark Carney's parliamentary secretary. They did meet in Saskatoon this week to talk about what they're going to do. Federal Agriculture Minister was there, so was Buckley Belanger, who is Saskatchewan's minister for the federal government. I think it was fair to say they all came out of that meeting pretty united on how Canada is going to respond to this, to address this. Canada is going to continue to talk with China. We got no details on what this is going to look like, what the federal government will do. I remember Moe saying yesterday he's not going to show Canada's cards or show the province's cards and how they're going to address this. And Ottawa is also planning to announce supports for producers in a couple weeks if need be. Prime Minister Mark Carney is also expected to come to Western Canada in a couple weeks as well. And as you mentioned, Moe is going to China in a few weeks. This is part of a larger trade mission he is doing there to other countries. And he wants Prime Minister Carney to come with him on this trip, basically saying that a deal can only be done with the Canadian Prime Minister and the Chinese president and not a provincial premier.
And Murray, Jeremy gave us a great synopsis there of the latest and what's happening. What should the approach be on this from the province and from the federal government?
Well, from the federal government, the first thing we have to do is get rid of that tariff on EVs, 100% tariff that incidentally was supported by everybody under Justin Trudeau, including Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. It was a silly notion related to concerns about spying electronic systems, among other things that are inappropriate. But we're dealing with very few vehicles anyway, and we know where the electrical vehicle thing is at this particular point. So it was kind of nonsense. To Premier Scott Moe's credit, he was always insistent that the bigger problem in terms of the trade war, notwithstanding all the things we heard about Donald Trump, was where we were going on canola. And at that point, it wasn't on the bulk product. Now it's been up to the bulk product. So that's a far bigger deal than just on meal and other things and oil and stuff that generally we don't export as much in terms of value because of the value the Chinese and others have in terms of doing that themselves with a bulk product. The silliness is, though, that in the years that Premier Scott Moe was battling Justin Trudeau because it made good politics, there was no anticipation that there was going to be times when the federal government and Saskatchewan needed to work together. Well, these are one of these times. We can have as many trade offices as we want, but Scott Moe right now is on point. The fact of the matter is we can't do this ourselves because we are not a national government, and nor do we have the sway to be able to do that. I don't even know if the federal Canadian government can do much under the circumstances. The NDP are making great hay out of the notion that Moe was slow to respond, et cetera, et cetera. You know, the slow boat to China thing and everything else that we're hearing from the NDP. But it's all a bit silly because it's counter to the argument. Their argument should be this is the absolute reason why we have to stand together as a nation and work with the federal government as opposed to picking fights with them. I don't get the NDP strategy here, although I assume it has something to do with the need to show their need to show that we also believe Saskatchewan can stand on its feet and be independent. Really, it's counterintuitive to what they've been saying in terms of their national strategy that does distinguish them from the Saskatchewan Party in a very meaningful way. And I think that would have been a far better approach on the part of the NDP.
And Murray, I've noticed the NDP spending a bit of time in Moose Jaw over the last number of weeks. Earlier this summer, their caucus met in the city. They took some photos out there. This week, they had a media conference highlighting some concerns over the number of physicians in the city. We know that there's an urgent care center that's planned for Moose Jaw. The NDP lost a couple of seats that they were hoping to win there in the last election. What do you make of their interest in the city and what's going on there when it relates to doctors as well?
Well, for the more cynical perspective, they think this is where they can win, and they're going to focus on PA and Moose Jaw. I'm rather cynical in terms of some stuff. We talked about the forest firefighting things earlier this winter because it just happens to play neatly into where they can win in PA and the forest fringe, they think, by capitalizing on the discontent and valid discontent of people in Prince Albert and elsewhere that see the government response here as being bad. Problem with Moose Jaw and healthcare is real. Losing 8 doctors in that short of time, it's the healthcare crisis everywhere. I don't know where the NDP stands on a lot of these issues because while they're simultaneously criticizing, and we'll probably get into this, the government for its handling of the finances, and there's ample reason to criticize the government and Scott Moe's handling of Saskatchewan finances since he's been in Premier. What is required is spending more money, and that's something that the NDP says right now we're also not doing, that we're doing too much of on one hand, and then basically saying, look, we're not spending enough in places like Moose Jaw in the other hand. There is a political element to this, undoubtedly, and the real problem for the NDP is that all that money spending that the Scott Moe has been doing for a decade right now, that has led to our deficit situations, is all about propping up rural vote, rural seat. And it's been sort of a politically successful strategy. The outcome in terms of the budget bottom line is basically the very things that we were complaining about last March when the budget came down and they presented this unrealistic surplus budget. Well, we'll see how that works out for them, because it won't be.
And speaking of the budget, Jeremy, the Fraser Institute, not always cited by the NDP in their criticism of the government. The opposition is latched onto something here. What are they pointing to?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely 2 groups here that don't see eye to eye. But the Fraser Institute came out with an opinion column saying Premier Scott Moe should take a lesson from former NDP Premier Roy Romano when it comes to being fiscally responsible. They say Moe's government is spending record high levels, driving up the deficit in this province. And he's actually the highest spending premier since 1965 on a per person basis. And this is adjusted for inflation. And so directors at the Fraser Institute say, all this is costing taxpayers money. Moe should rein it in and look to Romano for this. Now, Romano is known as the premier who came in after the Grant Divine Progressive Conservatives. He made a bunch of cuts because he kind of had to because the province was facing bankruptcy. And Romano did rein in spending and he got the province back to black. And the Fraser Institute said this did help the business environment in the province because he didn't make a bunch of huge tax increases while doing this. Also came at a bit of a political cost, though, for the NDP in doing this because a lot of Romano's cuts were in rural Saskatchewan, and the NDP continues to feel that pain each election cycle because of the cuts to rural healthcare, and people in rural Saskatchewan still feel that.
And Murray, we're going to lean on you for your memory bank to go
historical
back.
Knowledge,
Yes, I'm putting this delicately. Are you surprised at this? Not only the criticism from the NDP, obviously we've heard this before, but the Fraser Institute of all places poking holes in the government spending here under Scott Moe.
Well, to their credit, the Fraser Institute, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, is consistent. They're not always right in terms of basically saying spending can always be curtailed. But I think they're certainly right in the reality. And the reality is that Scott Moe has not been a good fiscal steward for Saskatchewan. The Sask party really hasn't been since Brad Wall found out in 2017 that, boy, deciding not to spend money isn't a very popular thing. And Scott Moe's always been governed by popularity. And once again, this is all about shoring up the rural base. I think of all the things that we do in terms of pouring money into roads and into, we talk about trade offices, but that's less consequential. But healthcare, everything that they need to do, all costs money. And if we're going to dispense all these services across the province in what amounts to a relatively inefficient way, which is the Fraser Institute criticism, by the way, then it's going to cost us. We need some kind of middle ground alternative. Scott Moe has not considered that because he more considers the consequences of losing rural vote in that particular way. Now, conversely, the NDP is usually the one that's the first to criticize the Scott Moe government for not spending enough, i.e. the Moose Jaw situation that you raised. So they can't have their cake and eat it too either. And one of the reasons I think that they were less successful in the last provincial election was simply because they couldn't find that middle ground properly in terms of proposing more spending and being critical of such. And I think that this has been a long-standing problem with the NDP. I'm not 100% sure the public is really as concerned about the deficit in Scott Moe's spending as perhaps they should be. And I think it's going to be a long-term problem of consequences. It already is. We're spending $1 billion on interest payments, our debt interest payments, in terms of basically our credit card bill interest each year. We have to get we have to rein it in, but I don't see under any circumstances where that's going to happen under a Scott Moe government, particularly under the results of the last election where they actually did lose city seats.
Murray, thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
And Jeremy, thank you.
Thank you.
That's Jeremy Symes, who covers the legislature for the Canadian Press, and political columnist Murray Mandryk, our political panel, back with us, and happy to have them back.